About a year ago, I transformed this broken truck that I rescued from the scrapyard into a cozy home on wheels. And ever since taking it on an epic cross-country road trip, I've been hooked on the thrill of adventure. But my homemade travel truck conversion can't comfortably fit more than one person. And as much as I'd like to pretend it can, this truck can't float on water. So in this video, we're building a new kind of tiny home, one that can float. Or at least we hope it will. In part 1, we met Steve, who showed us his awesome homemade pub and sold us this pontoon boat that was salvaged after it sank to the bottom of a river. We brought the boat home, made sure the repairs that Steve had done were up to snuff, and transferred the boat onto a more robust trailer. After picking up a second boat to steal the pontoons from for more flotation, we found holes in one of the donor pontoons, allowing water to get in. Thankfully, our friend Griffin got the holes all patched up, and we could mount the donor pontoons underneath the boat, creating a quad-toon. And although it was still intact, the decking that came on this boat had definitely seen better days. When we picked it up, it was completely soaked in water, and it's falling apart, especially around the edges. So to give ourselves a solid foundation to build off of, we built this super solid deck out of 3 layers of different material, starting off with a 1/4-inch layer of solid PVC, which should give us a nice waterproof base layer, but it's not very strong. So on top of that, we added a 3/4-inch layer of red oak, which is super dense. And just to drive it home, we added another 1/2-inch layer of sheathing. And you'll see right here that we staggered the overlap to make sure the top layer doesn't land on the same seam as the layer below it. And then used probably, 200 screws to screw it all down. So needless to say, this deck isn't going anywhere. Yesterday, James, Donald, and I framed out our first wall, and today we're gonna try to tackle the 3 remaining walls. The framing process is pretty repetitive work, chopping 2x4s to length. Sort of like cutting popsicle sticks to build a house in preschool, except this is a real house. Something I didn't have in preschool was ChatGPT, which told us exactly how much wood we needed and what cuts to make to reduce waste. The ground we're working on isn't completely level, so we secured the boat to the trailer and jacked it up with a stand under each corner. We made little adjustments to get the deck as level as possible. Finally, we get to put walls up on the boat. This first one is the front wall, where we plan to have a big sliding glass door. The next piece is half of the right side wall, making it a lot easier to lift up into position. We're putting a lot of trust in only 2 clamps to hold this up while we go grab the next piece. This one is definitely pretty heavy, but nothing we can't handle. With 2 more clamps holding up this section, we bring up the rear wall and slide it into place. At this point, it seems like a good idea to start nailing these sections together. Now that we've got some clamps freed up again, we can add the front section of the left wall, and finally, this little guy that's gonna be our bathroom wall.
Oh my God, it fits.
With our wall sections up, we could nail them together and move on to securing the walls to the boat. We drilled a hole in the framing, subfloor, and the crossmember below, allowing us to bolt it down nice and tight.
And luckily for us, even though we didn't check when we were building them, it turned out everything's perfectly level.
But once we got all of our walls up, we realized we might have a problem on our hands.
Our original plan was to have our roof joists on top of the walls. They were gonna be on top of this top plate, but then we remembered we don't know what the hell we're doing. And this thing's getting pretty tall.
So instead of doing this, we dropped the joists down and used these stainless steel joist hangers to secure them to the inside of the wall framing.
But then we were met with the reminder, it's not always easy to work with your friends. I wanted exposed roof joists. However, with doing this, we were gonna expose our hangers, and that wouldn't look too good.
It would also be pretty difficult to run ceiling lights above the joists.
It's possible, but
this is pretty much how all of our decisions go. Not all of them, but some of them.
most of them.
Nonetheless, we've got ourselves some nice solid roof joists here. But before the roof can go on, we want to install lower and upper decks in the front and back of the boat. And we didn't have $1,000 in the budget to spend on composite decking, so we had to get creative. Just so happens, I knew of an old dock with some solid composite decking that was ripe for the taking. The only problem was the boardwalk going out to that dock had rotted out, and the dock itself was infested with wasps. So my dad and I suited up in some wasp suits from Amazon and got in there. Before we can add the lower and upper outdoor decks, there's a couple things we've got to take care of. The outdoor deck is gonna butt right up against this area, which is currently exposed. So I applied a bead of this gray liquid flash and spread a nice even layer over this area. A few days later, it had dried into a tough, waterproof layer. Lastly, we addressed this front cross member, which had definitely seen better days. Finally, we brought up one of our salvaged deck boards to test out how stiff it was. Clearly, it's got some flex to it. So we ripped about an inch off these boards to make them the same height as our aluminum cross members. After laying the deck boards back up here with the added wooden supports, it felt way more stable. But then we noticed some bite marks from what I can only imagine was a hungry beaver. So we trimmed the end off of each board before putting them back up there. Next up, we measured and pre-drilled holes before sending screws into the cross member below. A spare board and some clamps worked great to cut all these boards nice and even. We tucked this board under here for some more support, and finally capped off the end of the deck with another board, giving it a more finished look. When it came to working around the engine in the back of the boat, it was a little bit more challenging than expected, but we finished up our front and rear lower decks.
And we're going to add matching upper decks, but first we need to get the zip wall on.
Zip sheathing is an exterior panel that's bare plywood on one side, but has a water-resistant layer on the other side. This should save us some time waterproofing things later. After nailing the sheathing in place, I could use the flush trim router bit to cut off the excess.
Holy shit. Oh, it just fell.
Yeah, don't do that.
Now that we've got a green box, we can move on to building those upper decks. And I'm kind of liking this natural audio thing. Let me know what you think down below.
Done. That's pretty nice. That's a nice corner,
That is nice.
right?
That's perfect.
Yeah.
To start off, we notched out this post so a board can sit right on top of it. We secured the board to the house with a joist hanger, leveled the post, and secured it with this black metal base. We repeated the same process on the other side, added some joists, and we've got some solid bones for the upper deck. But then, Donald pointed out our biggest problem yet. Each of the 4 pontoons sit on a wooden bunk. As you can see, the middle pontoons have support from front to back, but not the outer pontoons. Donald noticed where the outer bunk ends, there's a dent forming in the pontoon.
1, 2, 3.
As we lifted the boat up and down, we saw that all the weight we've been adding is beginning to crush the pontoons. We're jacking up the boat to relieve the pressure from the pontoons until we figure out a solution. We did realize there's a little bit of extra room to slide the boat back on the bunks, so we connected one truck to the front of the trailer and brought in a second truck with a winch. The winch line was hooked up to the boat rather than the trailer. We used this truck to hold the trailer still and then reeled in the winch line to shift the boat back on the trailer. But the boat could only go so far before the trailer started tipping backwards. And then James's dad pointed out another problem with the trailer itself. With all this weight, the trailer is flexing like a noodle. So it looks like it's time to cover this bad Larry up to protect it from all the rain that's to come later this week. Conveniently, this created a safe, dry place to store our tools and materials while we focus on fixing those problems. We'd love to hear how you'd go about doing this, and we look forward to seeing you in part 3. Love you guys, and as always, keep making the most of it.